Good morning, everyone. My name is Janet Rutledge. I am the MLA for Burnaby North and the chair of the Select Standing Committee on Finance and Government Services, a committee of the Legislative Assembly that includes MLAs from the government and opposition parties. I would like to acknowledge that I am joining today's meeting from the Legislative Precinct here in Victoria, which is located on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking people, now known as the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. I would also like to welcome everyone who is listening to and participating in today's meeting on Budget 2022 consultation. Our committee is currently seeking input on priorities for the next provincial budget. We are at the end of our first week of presentations, with additional meetings taking place later this month. British Columbians can also share their views by making written comments or by filling out the online survey. Details are available on our website at bcleg.ca/FGS budget. The deadline for all input is 5 p.m. on Thursday, September 30th, 2021. We will carefully consider all input and make recommendations to the Legislative Assembly on what should be included in Budget 2022. The committee intends to release its report in November. For today's virtual meeting, most presenters are organized into small panels based on theme, with others making individual presentations. We will be finishing off the week with presentations on the environment, including parks, wildlife, energy, climate change, and water, as well as some presentations on food security and housing. Each presenter has 5 minutes for their presentation. To assist presenters, there is a timer available when in gallery view. Following presentations from the panel or following an individual presentation, there will be time for questions from committee members. At that time, I ask that members indicate they have a question, and we will keep a speaking list. I also ask that everyone please put themselves on mute and wait until you are recognized before speaking. All audio from our meetings is broadcast live on our website, and a complete transcript will also be posted. I will now ask members of the committee to introduce themselves.
Good morning, Madam Chair. I'm Ben Stewart, the Deputy Chair and the member for Kelowna West.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Lauren Dirksen. I am the MLA for Caribou-Chilcotin. Definitely looking forward to your presentations as well as the rest today.
Greg Kylo, MLA for the Shuswap, come from the traditional territories of the Secwepemc-speaking peoples.
Good morning. I'm Megan Dykeman, MLA for Langley East, which resides on the traditional territories of the Kwantlen, Katzie, Matsqui, and Semiahmoo First Nations. I'm looking forward to your presentations this morning.
Good morning, everyone. I am Harvinder Sandhu, MLA for Vernon-Monashee. We are located on the unceded and traditional territory of the Okanagan Indian Nations, and I look forward to your presentations.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Pam Alexis, and I am the MLA for Abbotsford Mission, and I come to you from the unceded and ancestral territory of the Stalo people. Thank you. Look forward to today.
Good morning. My name is Mike Starchuk, MLA for Surrey Cloverdale, which is located on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, which include the Semiahmoo, Kwantlen, and Katzie.
Thank you. Assisting the committee today are Jennifer Arl and Mai Nguyen from the Parliamentary Committee's Office and Amanda Heffelfinger from the Hansard Services. So thank you to everyone, and we'll begin with our first panel. We have a full day of presentations today. Our first panel is on housing, and there are 4 panelists, and we'll hear from all 4, and then I'll open it up to questions from the committee. So our first presenter is Annette Morgan. So
morning,
Annette,
everybody.
whenever you're ready.
I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Annette Morgan. My traditional name is Noxious. Translated in Gitxsan means Mother of the Stikine. I'm the Executive Director of the Zellkamp Friendship Center in Smithers, Seaside in Houston. Thank you for having me today. Some of the key messages I'd like to present for in terms of housing is the long-term investment capacity for friendship centers, provincial core funding recommendations to increase that reflects urban Indigenous off-reserve impacting housing in specifically northern communities. Other interests that I have under the BC COVID-19 action plan that impacts housing are free PPE for any organization providing housing and for any organization providing supports to seniors. So recognizing that the cost of personal protection equipment is significant, specifically for organizations that lie outside of areas that do not have large or big box businesses within the province or have access to, the costs are significantly increased. Other issues that in terms of housing for a stronger foundation for BC, looking at supports for seniors in housing, including free support, whether that's in conjunction with summer student programs for free resources that they can access. Under a safe and adequate housing for residential school survivors, for elders housing and funding that recognizes the vulnerability of elders on fixed incomes, either those who own their homes or who are renting. This would allow elders to age in place rather than moving to homes. When we look at infrastructure for homes and housing, one of the key items that I'd like to bring forward is the need for cooling centers or air quality control. And that certainly also needs to be recognized for housing across the province. And finally, I think one of the main issues is providing under a Healthy BC for housing support centers or support resources in terms of detox and community at risk. I believe that's it for my time, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Annette. And now we'll hear from Jenny Robinson, Nelson Cares Society. Whenever you're ready, Jenny.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate being here this morning, and thank you for hearing from communities across the province, specifically on housing. I work for Nelson Care Society. I'm the executive director for this organization, and it was established in 1974 as one of the original community service resources boards in the province, and is now a multi-service community agency. We have about 140 employees, and we operate in 4 key areas: legal information services through an advocacy center funded by the Law Foundation of BC, services for community living, residential employment, and inclusion programs funded through Community Living BC, Community Kootenay Seniors Program, which is a community program that's funded through Better at Home, the Osprey Foundation, and Intermittent Foundation grants across the province and the country. And we have a stock of affordable and emergency housing in the community, which we've operated for about 20 years now. I will begin my presentation to talk about the need to increase affordability in our community. The context is that Nelson is in the southeast corner of British Columbia. It's a beautiful community nestled in mountains around the area and many other communities surrounding it. We've had a 0 vacancy rate in our community since 2014. Now this is ubiquitous across the West Kootenay region. And no surprise, this has resulted in unreachable housing and rental prices and lack of stock, workforce displacement, people no longer being able to live in the community, and then increased GHG due to long work commutes. Now people are traveling 45 minutes or an hour to different communities to work because they can no longer afford to live in these communities. And of course, an increase in homelessness. Nelson has held one of the highest per capita homelessness rates in Canada for many years. For such a small community, we have a large number of folks that are completely displaced and unhoused. The community poverty rate has hovered just over 20% for many years. Now with increasing housing costs, we are seeing more and more families and seniors through our doors for emergency housing supports. Our housing shortage and the systems gap. First let me share a genuine thank you to the recent and substantial investments by this government that has been made in affordable housing over the recent years. We're seeing results now, which is really fabulous. But the community of Nelson has benefited with 3 new buildings coming online. One came online in May, and the 2 others should be finished in fall and winter of 22 for a total of 128 units. One was funded through the Community Housing Fund, which means that it has an ongoing operating agreement. And the other 2 were funded through the previous administration, and there's no operating agreements attached to those developments. And also just the increasing costs of development and building costs have really challenged those buildings to remain affordable, frankly. None of these 3 buildings, however, will offer or meet the needs of those with complex housing needs in our region. The following gaps remain to meet the population's need. We really need supportive housing in the region, staffed 24/7, and accompanied with an increased investment in substance use recovery programs to tackle the opioid crisis that we're really seeing, throughout the region and of course throughout the country. And we have really no service, substantial service. We do have allied agencies that are dealing with it, such as Anchors, Nelson Community Services, and ourselves. But there's no complex service coordination to handle this issue that's really becoming more and more complex for all of us to deal with. We also would like to see an increased investment in service coordination with community mental health and urgent response teams, as well as tertiary beds for mental health recovery, because it really is a continuum. Housing is not just one door, one place. It's actually part of a continuum of service in a community. People require supports to maintain their housing when they've been deeply involved in substance misuse or have a serious mental health condition or both, or a combination of a chronic health disorder as well. So we really need to see that as a continuum of service, all the way from psychiatric care all the way to end of life, and really encouraging the government to look at it as a comprehensive response to people's health and wellness. Another key area of service inequity that we're seeing is supports for seniors. We're seeing more and more seniors through our doors for emergency housing. And this is being exacerbated by the decrease in affordability and the lack of stock and people not being able to maintain their independence. And we really need to see more supports for inclusion, transportation, in-home supports, and system navigation and advocacy for seniors. With all the technology, the older generations are really struggling, and some of the younger ones too, but really make it very difficult to navigate health systems, mental health systems, and we really would like to see some investment in that coordination. And finally, I'd just like to touch on emergency response, and as Annette just mentioned, the cooling and the need to really look at the building fabrications.
Jenny, you're out of time, so I'll give you one or 2 sentences.
So I'm actually done. That was my last statement. So really, really just being prepared for pandemic and forest fire response, and how much the coordination has relied on the community during the last 18 months. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. And now we'll hear from Angela Fletcher, Comox Valley Coalition to End Homelessness.
Thank you. I would like to acknowledge that I'm living and working on the ancestral and traditional unceded territories of the Comox First Nations. I'm the coordinator for the Comox Valley Coalition to End Homelessness. The coalition consists of 36 member agencies who serve our most vulnerable populations in the community. We work as a collective to plan, coordinate, recommend, advocate for, and implement community responses to homelessness and to affordable housing. I would like to thank you for this opportunity to give feedback on Budget 2022 and for continuing to recognize the housing crisis in BC. We are grateful that the province provided emergency support during the pandemic as it exacerbated our housing crisis. We are particularly grateful for the strengthening community funds that are coming to our community through the Union of BC Municipalities. We look forward to seeing the positive impact on our community, so thank you. The Government of Canada legally recognized an explicit right to housing in the National Housing Strategy Law passed in June 2019. Housing is a determinant of health and a fundamental human right. It is integral to core human values such as community inclusion, dignity, and security. Unfortunately, at this time, housing has become a source of growing socioeconomic inequality, increasing wealth and health for those that own housing, and driving those who do not into greater poverty and ill health. Like many BC communities in the Comox Valley, our affordable housing situation is dire. In 2020, we completed a regional housing needs assessment that told us our vacancy rate rarely exceeds 2%. Nearly 30% of those housed are in core housing need, with 32.8% of those homes containing children. Equity-seeking groups, including Indigenous households, senior households, and households with at least one person with an activity limitation, reported greater rates of core housing need compared to other households in the region. Over 58% of people indicate their monthly housing cost is not affordable to them. Overall rental rates have increased over 21% in the last decade, with half of that increase happening in the last year. Over 10% of renters are using some sort of subsidy to pay rent. In 2020, our point-in-time count indicated a minimum of 32 people are experiencing homelessness. In January of 2020, the BC housing waitlist for subsidized units in the Comox Valley had 270 applications, 73 families, 82 residents with disabilities, 74 seniors, 12 persons requiring a wheelchair, modified housing, 25 singles, and also supplement applicants for rent. In January of 2021, the coalition estimated there were over 200 unhoused people in the Comox Valley. That number consisted of 37 people residing in a motel that is funded through BC Housing Emergency Relief, 89 people waitlist for supported housing, 69 distinct users who have access to emergency shelter beds, and this number doesn't include transitional shelter numbers and people that we had to turn away. In January of 2021, the coalition estimated and communicated to BC Housing and Minister Eby, with the support of our local municipalities and regional district, that our community is in immediate need of 50 temporary shelter spaces and another 100 units of supported housing. We must consider that Indigenous people are overrepresented in homeless populations in our communities across Canada, including the Comox Valley. According to our 2020 homeless count, 20% of homeless populations in the Comox Valley identified as Indigenous, compared to 5% of overall population. As with the many other communities across BC, we have a full spectrum of affordable housing needs in the Comox Valley. Today, we're choosing to focus on our most vulnerable and request that in Budget 2022, the government gives attention to increasing funding for deeply affordable, non-market and non-profit housing with and without support. Our request is supported by the Regional District Housing Needs Assessment Report, indicating 30% of people in the Comox Valley are in core housing need, and the private market cannot provide this type of housing. It is imperative that some of these sites include on-site supports, while others do not. A major limiting factor to building non-market housing, even with government support to finance building, is land. For Budget 2022, our request is to work with all levels of government to acquire land for specific purpose of building non-market housing. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Angela. And our final speaker on this panel is Pat Mckenna, Habitat for Humanity.
Well, good morning, and thank you for allowing Habitat this valuable time in your schedules and for this community consultation. My name is Pat Mckenna. I'm coming to you today actually from Nova Scotia, the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq First Nation. I'm currently the Executive Director for Habitat for Humanity Vancouver Island North, and I'm here today representing the 8 affiliates of Habitat for Humanity in British Columbia. Habitat for Humanity works with volunteers and staff to ensure low middle income families experiencing housing insecurity are able to build strength, stability, and self-reliance through a hand up to home ownership opportunities. You know, we began, as all nonprofits do, as a grassroots organization, just trying to make the world a better place. And as we grew our capacity, we've become stronger and able to serve more families in British Columbia because of the combined strengths of the municipal, provincial, and federal partnerships. The current support provincially of the Housing Endowment Fund in British Columbia has had an incredible impact on the growth of our organization. After partnering with BC Housing and provincial government in 2016, we've been able to grow our impact by over 150%. Each home that we build serves multiple families over its lifetime. Each home builds a legacy for hundreds of future families in British Columbia. So our program and how it works, families are selected based on core housing need. The partner families pay an affordable monthly payment of 30% of their gross income, which generates equity and allows them to provide a lasting, secure legacy for their family over generations. They're residents of British Columbia, they have secure employment, and their income is defined within the BC housing income limits. They're committed to 500 hours of volunteerism. The asset remains with Habitat through the use of a right of first refusal clause on all properties. So that ensures the homes can serve many families for decades to come. We assist underserved communities, racialized, Indigenous, single parents, who have been systematically shut out of home ownership and cannot realize the stability and the wealth building opportunities that safe, secure housing can bring. Our model really frees up valuable housing stock as a large portion of our families are selected out of subsidized housing. And the social and economic benefits of Habitat. So, you know, the financial stability alone allows more use of services and business. A reduction in the long-term social service support allows that support can go to others who need the assistance. Our families invest in their community. They give back through volunteerism. Their children increase their opportunity to attend higher education levels, and they move out of that insecure rental cycle forever. Family health improves, reducing the need for medical and health services. Children get to participate in extracurricular activities, deepening that community bond. Property taxes, of course, contribute to the growth of the infrastructure in each community we serve. And each homeowner payment gets reinvested into building more homes and helping more families in British Columbia. So, you know, continuing to support Habitat just makes good sense. We've established long-term partnerships as we scale up our models across British Columbia. We have partnerships with CMHC, BC Housing, the municipal governments in the communities we serve, community foundations, corporate and organizational funding, granting agencies, retailers such as Home Depot and many others. Helping thousands of volunteers connect to enrich their community and assisting other charities in the growth and capacity building. And our social enterprise provides opportunities in our restores, as well as diverting thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds out of the landfill. So really from a climate perspective, we're very, very favorable organization as well. Our ask today, you know, Habitat for Humanity provides a bridge on the housing continuum. From subsidized housing to market housing. Our hand up to families provides a much needed lift to people in need. And regardless of how we have ended up in this housing crisis, it's incumbent on all of us to solve it. Habitat is a piece of that puzzle and a part of the solution. So our ask today is to increase the Housing Endowment Fund contribution in British Columbia from $50,000 to $100,000 per door to construct up to 50 homes annually. Create a Habitat-specific funding stream, including seed money to assist with pre-development costs, organizational program capacity, and determine access to provincially owned land to build more homes. Thanks so much for your time today, and I'll be available for questions.
Thank you, Pat. And now we've heard from all members of the panel, and we'll now turn to the committee for questions. Megan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the panelists today for your presentations. They were very interesting. My question is for Pat at Habitat for Humanity. The proposal that you talked about with the endowment and that is that happening with an increased amount in any other province? Can you explain that a bit more? I'm interested in the per door subsidy and sort of what your thoughts are with that, if you could expand on it a bit.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for your question. Currently in British Columbia, we're the recipient of a portion of the Housing Endowment Fund, and it's about $800,000 annually to help all the habitats across British Columbia. And in other provinces, I can speak to Ontario, I can speak to Edmonton. They receive $100,000 a door from the provincial government. I believe Saskatchewan as well. And there's other provinces that are working towards relationships with their provincial governments. And it just is a really strong benefit for us to help serve these families when we have that lift, especially with the increase in building costs, et cetera. So there are other relationships in other provincial governments that are at $100,000 per door.
Other questions?
We recently had a project open in Mission, and we were absolutely delighted to work with Habitat, and it's just been such a win-win for the community, for the families that have now got a home, and so just really can't thank you enough. The model works really, really well, so thank you.
Ben.
Thanks very much, Chair. And just to go back to you, Pat, when you talk about this bridge from subsidized housing to home ownership, how does the province treat these homes in terms of first-time home purchasers with the exemption for GST? Or property purchase tax. I'm just wondering, do they get the benefit of being a first-time homeowner like anybody else would if they didn't have your help?
They get the benefit of first-time home buying. There's a reduction in the GST, but we still pay a remittance on every home we sell. It's getting more and more expensive as the fair market values increase, and that's probably a battle for us for another day. But they do get the exemption as a first-time home buyer. So there is a small reduction there on the GST.
So, okay, and just a second question is, on your ask for the $50,000 to $100,000, how much would that be on a per annum basis? How many homes are you building in a year in British Columbia?
We're building approximately between 40 and 50, but we weren't building anywhere near that until the partnership. And so the obvious partnership that we started in 2016 escalated our building from 15 to 50. So we figure with proper support we can get well over 80 to 100. Most of our affiliates are scaling up right now. There's some that are stronger than others, and the rest we came together about 6 years ago to really advocate as one group and to combine our forces, so to speak, to really become stronger overall as organizations.
Okay, right. Thanks, Pat. And I guess just to the rest of you, I hear loud and clear the message. We know the crisis, and it's everywhere. It's not just here in British Columbia, the challenge with housing, the unaffordability of it. And I'm sure that the government has it as a high priority. Well, it is already a high priority. The problem is really, how do we get to making reality out of creating the issue about affordability and housing that is affordable for people that are just getting started in terms of just trying to find, or seniors for that matter, as you mentioned in your comments. So thanks very much.
Mike.
Well, thank you, Chair, and to the presenters, thank you as well. There's a lot of crossover there. My questions are to Angela. You tossed out an awful lot of numbers for me to juggle down on a piece of paper, so I wasn't quite sure on a couple of things. So you did touch on rent increases and the amounts that were there, and you kind of lended to a major rent increase in the last few years. So I'd like you to kind of explain how that took place, and as well if you wouldn't mind, the 50 temporary housing units. What's the vision for that?
Well, the rent increases just happened with the market. So we saw, like on average, for an example, 5 years ago, it might have been about $900 for a 2-bedroom. Now you're looking at, currently, if I was to go on and search for a rental for a 2-bedroom, I'd be looking at about $1,900 a month. For myself, I'm a single parent and I pay $1,400 for a 2-bedroom. If I was to move out now, I'd be paying about $1,900. It's just with the market. The rents have increased. People buying in, they're paying more, and so they are charging rents that are high. And then others that have had their homes for a long time are noticing that they can get more, and so they're asking for more. And if you need a place to go, that's where you go. And sorry, in your second question?
It was the 50 temporary housing units, and what's the vision for that?
Well, it's an emergency shelter space with support. So we have 132, at least 132 homeless people in our community. About 54% of those are completely unhoused and on the streets. And so we need, especially going into the winter, we need support for emergency shelter beds at a minimum 50 so that we can care for our community members. We have 10 to 15 encampments at any time in our community that can be found along riverways or different areas. And we also have properties that contain people, 15 to 30 people was our last count, that will also need to be housed coming into the winter months. So at this point in time, we are looking at increasing our warming center, which is our Connect Center, and hoping that we can provide some more shelter mats over the winter. And meanwhile, trying to get permanent housing for these people. So we're looking at 100 supportive housing units in 2 buildings with 50 each.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Lauren.
Thank you, Chair. It is definitely, to echo MLA Stewart's comments earlier, it is a massive issue throughout the entire province. Angela, you could be quoted as saying, providing these units as deeply affordable. Can you give me a sense of what that actually means?
Yeah, so a lot of us pay 30% of our income, and as I mentioned, we have a large number paying 50% or more of their income towards their towards living. So deeply affordable, we just mean that it's under 30%. So that we can still have money to go towards services if services are needed. To stay healthy. So deeply affordable just means like affordable living, 30% or less of your income goes towards your housing.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
You have any other questions? Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Pat, this is a question of curiosity. 500 hours of volunteer work prior to getting the home. That amount of volunteer work and volunteerism, I'm just curious as how much does that rub off after?
I could say it's probably unquantifiable at this point because we don't track the after. But what does happen generally, first of all, 500 hours, you can imagine, for a single parent is almost insurmountable. It's very, very difficult to do. We partner with our families 2 years in advance. They go through a financial training program, which counts as part of their volunteerism. And, it's difficult. They're taking vacation to try and work through that partnership. And then afterwards, what we notice, and it's more anecdotal, but what we notice is that they're they're a more solid contributor to not just our habitat builds, but they volunteer throughout the community in different things because they have that stability and security of housing that they don't have to worry about anymore. And, before I joined Habitat, I never understood what it was like to not only be unhoused, but to have that insecurity. And when you have that, it's all you think about. And when we provide, and when all these people on the call provide housing to people, it sheds that, and they're able to focus on becoming a stronger person in society.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Ben.
Sorry, one last question to maybe Annette and Jenny and Angela. The point in time where you count people that are homeless, and Angela, you just talked about people living along the rivers, et cetera, but I think about Annette up in Houston, and, I just kind of trying to find these peoples in these rural areas, et cetera. Is there any kind of standardization, like a particular date when you go out and you try to do that point in time count so that we can get a better number so we understand? Because the degree, it's not, it validates, I guess, what it is that, like you said, I think that there was, I forget the number, but anyways, the bottom line is there any kind of standardization that we can speak to, or is there a way of collectively working on something like that so that we can bring agencies and not-for-profits like yourselves together and kind of say, okay, this is the date, we're going to do this, and so that I think government and the agencies like BC Housing and all the others can have a better understanding of, okay, this is the magnitude of the issue.
I'll jump in first there. Yes, there is coordination. If you're a designated community through the federal funding, through the Reaching Home, it's called now. It's been a program for over 20 years, and we have point-in-time counts where communities pick a period, one day during a period of time. However, that's shifting to what we're calling the by-name list, so that in the community we're not relying on one anonymous day of count. We're actually collecting names, which it's been a process of coordinated access that the federal government has funded, and we're just at the beginning of implementation in British Columbia, frankly. But there has been coordination with BC Housing for the last point in time count, which was 2018 and then 2020, which was drastically interrupted because of COVID. But yes, there is some coordination going on to validate those numbers, because I appreciate as funders, you want to know that these are unique individuals and that the investments are actually making a difference. And so this is our attempt. It is a very difficult and challenging data collection process, but there is coordination, and yes, there are systems being developed. We have had challenges, frankly, with HIFIS implementation in BC Housing. Other provinces have been funded through the federal government to use HIFIS, which is a data collection system on housing and family support, which has been used for decades across the country. And BC Housing holds the unique license in BC. So we've been challenged to try to figure out how to navigate that in the communities where we work, so that we can coordinate that data more substantially. It's a very dense and tricky process.
That's great. That's information I never knew. So thank you.
Amanda, did you want to jump in? Okay, I think we can wrap it up at this point. I want to, on behalf of the committee, thank all of you for the work that you're doing in your communities. And I also, I guess in conclusion, want to say that, as a Burnaby MLA, where I know firsthand about the housing crisis in my community, it's very important for us all to see how widespread it is throughout the province. That I think there's probably not a corner of our province that isn't touched by the housing crisis. And you've also put a human face, a human picture to the impact that it's having on families, on individuals, and on communities, and that it spins off into other areas of well-being. So thank you for this, and you've given us a lot to work with in terms of our recommendations for the next provincial budget. Thank you again. And we'll say goodbye. And we'll now recess until 9:20. And our next presenter is Sarah Allison, Horse Council BC. So Sarah, whenever you're ready. Okay, you can begin. You've got 5 minutes, Sarah, and then we'll ask you some questions.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Allison, and I'm the Recreation Coordinator with Horse Council of BC. I would like to acknowledge that the land where we do our work is located on the unceded traditional territory of the Katzie, Kwantlen, Matsqui, and Semiahmoo First Nation. Horse Council of BC is a non-profit organization with over 23,000 members. Our organization covers everything equestrian related, but today I will be advocating on the behalf of equestrians who choose to pursue outdoor recreation with their horses on the trail and at campsites. We would like to also acknowledge the work of our affiliate partnership with the Backcountry Horsemen of BC, who are very involved in trail and campsite projects throughout BC. The benefits of outdoor recreation have amplified with the COVID-19 pandemic, with people seeking refuge in the outdoors. People who originally spent time taking their horses to competitions during the summer decide to go camping with their horses instead and explore the trails. The benefit of recreating outdoors while riding is twofold, as you not only receive the benefit of being out in nature, but you also experience a connection with your horse. Therapeutic riding and equine-assisted therapy are practiced in many communities, and it can attest to the mental and physical benefits it can have on people. More and more literature is also being released on how nature-based activities can decrease anxiety and depression symptoms and improve physical and mental well-being. Along with the ability to advance our health with outdoor recreation, we have also the ability to make a substantial economic impact. Although equestrians are a relatively small group compared to other user groups, the economic impact equestrians make is large. Horse Council's BC's Equine Economic Impact Study that was completed in 2019 shows that 46% of the equine industry is recreational and accounts for an approximate total of $360 million in economic impact. There are approximately 60,000 horses in BC, and the expenses with housing, feeding, and caring for them is significant. Equestrian tourism also drives economic value through guest ranches and guide outfitters. The Guide Outfitters Association of BC, there are 39 of their members who offer hunting on horseback, and 33 offer trail rides. Tourists want to come to BC to ride the vast mountain ranges, and I know by experience, every time I'm on vacation, I'm seeking a place to go riding. Horse Council BC also helps support recreational riders with its BC Equestrian Trails Fund, and since its inception in 2011, it has provided over $300,000 of funding to trail and campsite projects. We are lucky to have the Backcountry Horsemen of BC apply for many of these grants, and last year they have had members volunteer 3,215 hours of their time. The Backcountry Horsemen of BC have signed 16 agreements to maintain trails and campsites in BC, and with plans to add 2 more agreements by the end of the year. The estimate value of the work put in by the Backcountry Horsemen in 2020 valued nearly $120,000. The hard work of these volunteer groups and the different funding models help, but it doesn't address the lack of structure and funding that is desperately needed for the outdoor recreation sector. The increase in outdoor recreation users during the pandemic highlighted the importance of BC outdoor recreation assets and the need to support them better. The demand on park staff due to COVID has made it difficult for volunteer organizations to find support for getting approval for trail maintenance and projects. The heavy reliance on volunteer organizations to take on trail maintenance can lead to volunteer burnout and certain trails not receiving the upkeep they need. When it comes to creating management plans for parks and trails, there has been times when horseback riders have been overlooked by regional districts and municipalities when reviewing outdoor recreation usage. We hope to work closer in the future with municipalities, regional districts, and the provincial government to be a key stakeholder during the engagement phase of the planning process. We are very grateful that British Columbia is already on the world stage when it comes to outdoor recreation, and with the right support, it will be able to live up to its name. We hope you take into consideration our following recommendations. An increase of operational funding for recreation sites and trails to a minimum of $20 million, hiring a parliamentary secretary specializing in outdoor recreation, working with the Provincial Trails Advisory Body to implement an integrated trail strategy for BC, prioritize money into inspecting and maintaining Forest Service roads to ensure safety to the public trying to access remote trailheads. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to present today.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Do we have questions from the committee? Lauren.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks very much, Sarah, for the presentation. I represent the Caribou-Chilcotin riding, so I'm certainly familiar with the guide outfitters and all of those departments that you talked about. I just wonder, can you give a bit of a sense of what those funds will do? Will it be better trails, more trails? What would that increased budget do?
Yeah, so operating trails expenses for rec sites and trails BC to help maintain the trails that we currently have, the upkeep of them.
So is that being user maintained now? There's no help from the government on those trails now?
I believe there is, but it's just Rec Sites and Trails BC, the funding that we have. And then we also have a ton of like the Backcountry Horsemen Society that I referred to. They have working agreements. They're solely a volunteer organization. They have working agreements with Rec Sites, Trails BC, and BC Parks, and different hydro and stuff like that. So yeah, it's just a heavy reliance on different volunteer organizations to help with those trails.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Sarah, with regards to the $20 million that you come up with, how did you arrive at that number? Because I know that you did mention your volunteers, and we all know that volunteers burn out and you can only rely on somebody for so long or organizations for so long. So how did you derive that number?
Yeah, so we work with the Outdoor Recreation Council of BC as well. And as a collective group, getting together mountain bike organizations, hikers, like a bunch of different outdoor recreation users. And we came to the $20 million just kind of to bump up the funding. I believe it was the $4 million that's currently for that.
Okay, thank you.
Lauren.
Thanks again, Chair. Sarah, so you just touched on something that was kind of rolling through my mind, which was a presentation that I think we heard yesterday. Perhaps it was the day before about mountain bikes. Are these multi-use trails then? I mean, I know certainly in our area they are, but I wouldn't want to speak for the rest of the province.
Yeah, we like to encourage multi-use trails. Of course, there are some safety issues related to, say, like downhill mountain biking, where you wouldn't want a downhill mountain biker on the same trail as a horse. They can share, climbing trails or trails kind of, cutting across the mountain. But you wouldn't want to have a horse on a downhill mountain bike trail where, a potential crash. But we do like to advocate for multi-use trails as much as possible, and educate people on how to pass horses safely and everything when it is multi-use.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think we have time for one more question, and that will be Pam.
Oh, I just wanted to say it's a great organization. We've just had, in the last couple of years, a campground in Mission open specifically for people with their horses. And I can't say enough about the volunteers that came out to actually build the paddocks and start clearing trails and all of that. So just thank you. It's been such an incredible asset, and I really do appreciate the increase to safety and maintenance of logging roads, because it is certainly an issue for all those recreational users in the Stave West area. So thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you, Pam. Appreciate it.
So with that, we'll close out this presentation. Thank you for taking the time and putting the work into advocating for the Horse Council of BC and to providing us with insight into how important it is and what you need. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Have a good day, everybody.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
We'll take a 5-minute recess.
the Federation of Mountain Clubs last year.
Well, I was actually only in this.
Okay, we'll call the meeting back to order, and we will now hear from a panel that is going to be addressing parks and recreation. Each speaker will have 5 minutes to make your presentation, and then after we've heard from all four, we'll open it up to questions from the committee. So our first presenter is Louise Pedersen, Outdoor Recreation Council of British Columbia.
Hello, thank you very much to all the committee members for inviting the Outdoor Recreation Council in to speak to you. We are a charitable organization. We're composed of organizational members representing the broad and diverse spectrum of outdoor recreation user groups in BC, including paddlers, hikers, mountain bikers, off-road motorcyclists, equestrians, quad riders, and nature interests. So I'll get started. So in addition to a healthy and educated population, BC's greatest asset is our natural environment. From our national and provincial parks to local trails and green spaces, BC's outdoor recreation assets are the building blocks of a diverse and sustainable economy and healthy and thriving communities. As communities in the province strive to develop sustainable and diversified economies less tied to a single extractive resource industry, outdoor recreation offers a promising path to prosperity, yet the resources for BC's outdoor recreation economy cannot be taken for granted. The more we protect and invest in public land and water infrastructure and facilitate quality recreational experiences for all British Columbians, the greater and longer lasting the dividends in the form of healthy communities, healthy economies, and healthier people. BC's provincial outdoor recreation assets are facing several pressing issues, including degradation of recreation infrastructure through a lack of maintenance, overuse, and also sadly through vandalism. There's a lack of facilities such as outhouses, wildlife-proof garbage containers, and signage. Environmental and cultural impacts, and there are insufficient staff and budgets to plan and to maintain these valuable assets. We're also very concerned about an increasing loss of road access to trailheads, recreation sites, and wilderness areas due to a lack of maintenance and deactivations of Forest Service roads resulting from insufficient provincial funding. The growing interest in the usage of outdoor recreation amenities have elevated the pressure on recreation sites and trails BC, and more investments are urgently needed to enhance its operational capacity. With a staff of only 50 people and a $8 million annual operating budget, this provincial agency oversees legally established trails, sites, and interpretive forests on 80% of BC's land base. So that's around 50,000 square kilometers per staff member. Following the reorganization of the recreation program in 2006, and in response to a smaller budget and larger workload, Rec Sites and Trails has entered into nearly 400 partnership agreements with recreation groups to manage trails and sites. And while the intention was Rec Sites and Trails to only manage campsites and forests and trails, this agency is increasingly being called upon by the provincial government for expert input and collaboration on dispersed recreation resources outside of established campsites and trails. Many of our members report that it's almost impossible to reach a recreation officer, and recreation groups are experiencing many difficulties in getting the necessary authorization permits to construct, rehabilitate, and maintain trails and other recreational facilities due to staffing shortages. This is also putting many worthy projects that have received COVID recovery support in jeopardy. So well-planned and maintained recreation amenities are an integral part of the outdoor recreation economy, and BC's brand is a $20 billion tourism destination, and it also contributes to health. Unless we start to make more significant investments in rec sites and trails, BC, similar to what the province did for BC Parks in this year's budget, we'll see a continued decline in recreation experiences, more conflicts, destruction of natural areas that the sector relies on, and the many benefits to BC's rural communities and to the province as a whole will not materialize. A significant annual operational budget uplift will put British Columbia in a much greater position to develop a world-class trail and recreation system that facilitates broad and inclusive and diverse participation in outdoor recreation and follows best practices for trail and site design and environmental considerations. Bold investments will facilitate rural development, achieve community health benefits, foster reconciliation through increased Indigenous representation in recreation planning, development, and management. It will also support recreation groups who are instrumental in developing and maintaining facilities and trails under partnership agreements with the agency, and it will reduce impacts to the environment and archaeological values through planning and education and compliance efforts. And so I just want to also note that this committee has previously recognized these shortfalls, and a recommendation last year was made to increase operational funding to rec sites and trails. So our recommendations this year is to increase the annual operating budget of recreation sites and trails BC to a minimum of $20 million. This will provide the agency with more staffing and better operational support to deal with increasing demands and greater complexities related to land use planning, facilitate more recreation opportunities for communities across BC, and support volunteer recreation groups. We would also like to see that a new ministerial position is created as Parliamentary Secretary for Outdoor Recreation under the Ministry of Forests. There's no such cabinet member at the moment. Sorry, I see that my time is up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Louise. And we'll hear from Colin Campbell, Elders Council for Parks in BC.
Thank you. Good morning. The Elders Council is a group of retired folks who have worked for BC's national, provincial, and regional park organizations. We celebrate BC's parks heritage, foster park awareness, and lead projects to support healthy, sustainable parks. This month, the Canadian government announced that they plan to invest $796 million to protect nature as part of nature-based solutions to address climate change. The United Nations has estimated that nature-based solutions could deliver more than 1/3 of the emissions reduction needed globally by 2030 to address climate change. It is a fact that no matter how aggressively we pursue technological and behavioral methods of reducing our carbon use, we cannot successfully address climate change without relying on nature-based solutions. BC's ecosystems have been dependably working for us silently over many millennia, but only recently has science been able to identify and quantify their importance to our very survival and well-being. When ecosystems are damaged, they start to fail. This failure results in catastrophic disturbances that cost lives, generate huge costs, and threaten our collective survival. Right now, we are all beginning to feel this happening around us. Over the last 100 years or more, we have destroyed core ecosystems for our immediate economic well-being and profit. Now we need to heal those ecological systems so we can return to some kind of ecosystem stability that supports livable environments for our species. Nature will always do fine. It's our species that will end. We need more fully functioning protected areas covering at least 50% of our land and water base. Integrated management systems that protect nature and provide sustainable recreation opportunities. It matters where the 50% is. It needs to be connected and represent all types of forests, meadows, grasslands, wetlands, deserts, etc. Large protected areas need to be linked through carefully designed wildlife corridors. These areas need to be managed to buffer the effects of activities on their edges. The whole land and water base must be intentionally managed as one within a coherent planning and stewarded system. This new management regime must be created and managed in partnership with First Nations and should recognize the potential offered by Indigenous protected and conserved areas. This will require new investments, new institutions and government structures, new public education programs and scientific analysis, funding to facilitate economic transitions, governments, First Nations, NGOs, communities, all working together towards a shared vision. This nature-based action plan can provide many benefits. Bring the certainty that can attract long-term investment and economic well-being. Reduce some of the threats of virus creation. Advance reconciliation with Indigenous peoples of British Columbia. Bolster BC's tourism image, and perhaps even provide opportunities to market our expertise to others around the world who are dealing with similar challenges. produce sustainable health services, cleaner air, cleaner water, improve fire management, reduce costs from the catastrophic impact of too little, too late, create a safe world for our grandchildren. We ask you to recommend the government negotiate a multi-party agreement to form a new governance entity that can lead the creation and implementation of a BC-designed 10-year or more nature-based strategy to repair our failing ecosystems, and seek significant national and international cost-shared funding to facilitate implementation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colin. And next we'll hear from AJ Strawson, International Mountain Bike Association of Canada.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me, and thank you for taking the time to hear from myself and from my associations that I'm here to represent today. As mentioned, my name is AJ Strawson. I'm the Executive Director for the International Mountain Bicycling Association of Canada. And while our mandate is to represent mountain bikers across Canada, today I'm speaking to you on behalf of mountain bike associations here in BC. As you've heard from other panelists on this session so far, trails form a core component of many communities across BC. And we seek trails to provide a broad level of benefits to our communities. Unfortunately, some of those benefits are under threat currently due to a number of different challenges that we're facing collectively. Some of the benefits include a broad and diverse economy by providing for amenity migration, simply seeking to draw people out into nature by inviting them to come and live in our more remote, more rural communities. I can't count how many people have moved to my local town, Squamish, simply because of the trails. And now many of those residents are seeking pastures elsewhere as more opportunities open up elsewhere, which is, I think, a great thing. We also know that trails provide a place of solace for our mental and our physical well-being. And I'm sure that that resonates with many of us as we enter what's now the fourth wave of the pandemic. And many of us are seeking a safe place to recreate and to find a little bit of peace and a little bit of quietness. And trails are that for many people and have become that for many people. And as such, the amount of traffic on our trails is growing very significantly and very quickly. We also know that trails provide a very financially high value per dollar spent. It's by far one of the most efficient ways of providing for recreation for people who are interested in recreating or simply providing a low structure way of getting out and enjoying nature. Some of the challenges that we're facing, though, include, and some of those have been echoed by others, include a lack of resources at Rec Sites and Trails BC, which is the organization that's been given the mandate to handle all of the quickly proliferating trail networks all across the country. Some of them are intentional. Some of them have arisen simply because people have gone to make their own experiences if they were frustrated at not having something locally available to them. We also know that the demand from COVID has been absolutely rapid. Even the ability to purchase a mountain bike right now, because so many people are interested, is getting harder and harder. That is showing on our trails. We know that the trail condition is deteriorating in those places where people are using them significantly more. And I think that from what I've heard from my constituents across the country, that's been happening far more, and including here in BC. And lastly, we have a significant threat to our trails and our trail access with climate change. The wildfire season this year has been, I think you could say, surprising, although not surprising at the same time. And while the wildfire might be the more cinematic way of pointing out the challenges that we have with trails, simply the increase in temperature and the deteriorated soil conditions we have on many of our trails mean that for all of the trails we have, we will start to need to invest more time, energy, and resources into maintaining them. So the combination of those three things means that we would like to echo Louise's and the Outdoor Recreation Council of BC's requests for an additional annual operating budget for recreation sites and trails at $20 million, not only to meet their mandate as intended, but also to overcome the challenges that the UNDRIP resolution brings to the table with increased participation in reconciliation. Creating a new ministerial position as Parliamentary Secretary for Outdoor Recreation, with the responsibility of creating and implementing an overarching outdoor recreation strategy for BC with input from stakeholders. And as a mountain biker and a multi-sport trail user, I definitely speak to the importance of all use types being at the table. And lastly, adopting the Provincial Trails Advisory Body recommendation for a revised trail strategy for BC and committing to funding that strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, AJ. And finally, we'll hear from CL Sander, Trails Society of BC.
Good morning, everyone. My name is CL Sander, and I volunteer as the board president for Trails Society of BC. Trails Society of BC is a volunteer society established in 1994 to assist the provincial government in establishing the Trans-Canada Trail in the province. I live and work in Greenwood, BC, on autonomous Sinixt traditional territory that is also claimed by the Ktunaxa and the Silks Nations through the colonial land claims process. Given the experience with extreme heat and wildfires this year, there should be no doubt we are living in a climate emergency. The latest IPCC special report states that we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50% within 5 years, which is still considered by many climate analysts to be insufficient. If there's going to be a decent human future, we must intensely reduce our CO2 emissions in every aspect of our lives. Reduction of emissions must be considered a priority with every dollar spent with public money. Now is the time to accelerate the maintenance and construction of active trail routes connecting rural communities. Transportation accounts for the largest percentage of all greenhouse gas emissions, at 41%. We can only achieve our climate goals if we help British Columbians spend less time driving and make it easier for individuals to walk, hike, and roll. To make this a reality, it will require further investments in trail projects between our rural communities, combined with investments in rural transportation systems with transit and with rail service. Accessing affordable and convenient transportation would be a huge incentive for people to decrease the need to own a vehicle. Incentives for electric mobility devices would also help lessen the need for car ownership. So what do these investments look like? Last year's active transportation budget was $18 million over several years. We propose increasing 12 times this amount, considering the recent announcement of over $4 billion to replace the Massey Tunnel in Vancouver. $216 million to support trails and active travel infrastructure throughout the province is reasonable towards the equitable funding of transportation infrastructure throughout the province. A portion of funding could be used to integrate the collaboration and support of an active transportation staff division in every region and road district of the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. That's MOTI. In addition, rural and Indigenous communities compete for limited resources, and many do not have the population and tax base to develop active transportation and trail infrastructure due to capacity constraints. Trails BC's dream is for the province to allocate at least $25 million over the next 3 to 4 years to the southern interior rail trails of the Trans-Canada Trail. We envision the rail trails to be prioritized as the active trail route it was meant to be. The Trans-Canada Trail has been taken over by off-highway vehicles, and the trail itself is difficult for people who are self-propelled and inaccessible to most people with mobility issues or hidden disabilities. The southern interior rail trails of the Trans-Canada Trail are rapidly degrading due to the lack of upkeep and maintenance. Last year, the Trans-Canada Trail lost 67 kilometers of recreation status to road status in the West Kootenays, and we don't want to see additional rail trails being turned into roads. We also support the call for $20 million at least to fund operational costs for Rec Sites Trails BC, as this portfolio has oversight for over 80% of public Crown land in the province, including the Trans-Canada Trail. Lastly, we would like to see investment in research to gather further data that illustrates how lack of active trail infrastructure disproportionately affects marginalized communities, such as those living with a disability, individuals living in poverty, people of color, and lesbian, gay, bi, transgendered, queer, positive identified people. Investments in active trail infrastructure will result in the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. It will increase recreation throughout our communities, increase rates of personal health and fitness, and will provide a positive trend towards transportation equity and the conservation of green space. On behalf of Trails Society of BC, I thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you so much, Ciel. And we will now open it up for questions from the committee. They are busy taking notes. Mike.
Thank you, Chair, and to the presenters, thank you as well. I like Colin. I like your last line in your bio. It's a great line. My question is to Louise with regards to lack of access to a recreational officer. Can you kind of just explain what that means?
Yeah, so the Outdoor Recreation Council represents a lot of these trail groups that work in direct partnership with Recreation Sites and Trails BC. So as I said, like there are around like 400, like maybe AJ, you know the number is around 400 partnership agreements. So Rec Sites and Trails, so agreements are kind of signed with these volunteer groups. It's the volunteer groups that do the work. So there's we hear from them that there's like a lack of opportunities for communications with the local rec officer that holds that agreement. Just because these rec officers, they're doing great work. There are just too few of them, and there's they oversee a huge land base and a lot of different groups that they have to liaise with. So yeah, we would like to see more of those. And then of course, as AJ and I'm sure others here too can attest to, there's a lot of groups would like to get permits to maintain trails, to maintain new trails, and to build trails. And it's often we're hearing that people are waiting for years, like 3 years, 5 years, because the process, not only is it because these recreation officers have limited time, but also like the process is just it's very different now than it was a decade ago. That they have to Rec Sites and Trails have to work with local First Nations to make sure that they don't have any concerns. So part of what we're proposing here is that we do need to see a significant budget uplift so that Recreation Sites and Trails BC has the capacity to kind of to work collaboratively with Indigenous groups as well. Recreation Sites and Trails BC, they oversee what is called the Trail Strategy for BC. We've just put forward the Provincial Trails Advisory Body has just put forward some recommendations to government, and I think I can reveal that Rec Sites and Trails are identifying that they need at least a few handfuls of people who can support the portfolio with working directly with Indigenous groups. Right now, they don't have anybody. There's nobody who's specialized. So that's a big issue.
Okay, thank you.
Next question is from Megan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of the presenters today. My question is for Colin Campbell, and it has to do with the recommendation for the governance entity to create a a BC nature-based strategy. I was wondering if you have an example of this elsewhere, sort of internationally or anywhere else, and who you would see sort of at that multi-party. When you say multi-party, who do you see at the table in addition to that, if anyone, or and if you could expand a bit?
I don't have a perfect model for that I could refer you to, but I will certainly research one and see what I can find. In terms of the concept, it's basically the simple fact that we just don't manage land very well in British Columbia. We never have, really. It's been a potpourri of management. We have to, if we're going to deal with climate change, we have to create something that's multi-year, multi-term, and engaging. And even when it comes down to the proposals from the various presenters today, the whole land has got to be managed as an integrated unit. And the only way that I can see that is something that happens over multiple years. You know, nature doesn't work in one-year cycles. It works in 20, 30-year cycles. And unless we find new governance mechanisms, because this isn't about, we all come asking for a pot of money, you know, but that's not what this is all about. Politicians, each of you, all of you, have to at some point come to terms with the fact that the 4-year cycle and the vote-getting proposals that are necessary to get elected, you know, have to take replaced by a much longer concept. And I would like to see this committee has some mandate for providing government services looking for fiscal accountability. And it seems to me that it could recommend governance change. And governance change is what we need. And that needs to involve all parties working together and saying, this is not going to be part of our usual election cycle, you know. We're going to take this climate change out of there and put it on a different footing. So really what I'm asking for is an innovative concept or proposal coming from this committee to change the way that governance happens so that those areas that don't produce voters, basically, i.e. the land and the water, you know, have a voice that lasts longer. That's really what I'm requesting, because unless we do that, we will not be able to address these questions. And they're all interlinked. The issue is that all of these things are interlinked. And finding a strategy that can be developed that the public can actually understand and go along with, you know, will actually help all political parties. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
Ben.
Thanks very much. And really, the presentations are great. We did have some earlier, as Lauren mentioned, from the Mountain Bike Association. And I think that, you know, you're all singing from the same song sheet. Recently, I had a presentation by a First Nation group in my riding that was talking about going back to the trails that existed before we were on the land here. And I thought, that's really interesting. However, it's not going to happen without strategy. There's a movement called Trails Okanagan, which is an extension of the rail trail that runs through, you know, from the Shuswap all the way down into the States. And I think, you know, they were kind of describing it as something like the Cotswolds, which is, you know, in England. And I think the thing about it is we don't see that. So my only thought about this is that I think the broader group coming together with tourism, you talked about the benefits. Where are they? They should be here with you. And I know that I was surprised years ago when I was in, I think, Burns Lake, and there's a mountain bike trails all around the community. And I thought, really? No, like nobody knows this unless you kind of happen to be an avid kind of maybe cyclist or somebody looking for that and a reader of those things. But I do think that broader group, First Nations, tourism, et cetera, will help advocate. I think that you're on the right track, and I do think even the Horse Council, which preceded you, et cetera, talks about this. And I just know that it's a good, logical investment. Where do we start? And I think that you've approached it properly. So anyways, I hope that we can support you or find a way to help you.
Pam.
Just want to thank the committee, or thank all of you for your presentations. And certainly in my community, we've never seen such pressure on our trail systems and on our recreational sites. So we hear you, and you know what, if anything, COVID has taught us how much we appreciate this and how much we need to take care of it and make sure it's managed properly, because there are areas that are not attended to as well. So, we have the problems with so many people arriving at one place and not having enough garbage receptacles and that kind of thing. So, we do need a strategy, 100%. And so I'm really interested in your recommendations, and you have put a lot of thought into this, and I very much appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. Anything else that anyone on the panel wants to say before I wrap it up? Okay, you've been very thorough. I think for some of us, you have presented us with fresh ideas and a fresh perspective. And what I take away as an urban MLA, what I take away from your presentation is that perhaps we in BC have taken nature for granted for too long, and that perhaps we've viewed it too much as a raw material and as a resource, as opposed to a place to be and a place to live. And I think the current crises, both the climate crisis and the pandemic, must motivate us to look at it differently. And I, for one, am reminded that during the pandemic, nature was a safe place to be. Wherever we lived in the province, it was probably the safest place for us to be. And you've proposed the notion of nature-based solutions to the crisis of our making. And I think there's a lot of work to be done to put those pieces together. And I think we want to do that. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And with that, we'll let you go. Thanks. And we will now recess for 15 minutes. So hello, everyone. Our next panel is on wildlife. And our first, both of them will have 5 minutes each to make a presentation. And then we'll open it up to questions from the committee. And so our first panelist is Tim Burkhart, Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative. So Tim, over to you.
Well, good morning, Honorable Chair and members of the Finance Committee. My name is Tim Burkhart, and I'm joining this meeting from the unceded lands of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples of the Esquimalt and Songhees Nations and Osage peoples. I represent the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative, or Y2Y. Y2Y is a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting and connecting habitats so people and nature can thrive. We appreciate that these are challenging times and that the province is focused on taking action on the ongoing COVID-19 outbreak and the devastating wildfires this summer. Let me take this opportunity to thank the committee for soliciting the input of diverse stakeholder voices in this Budget 2022 process. Y2Y believes there's tremendous opportunity to support communities in recovering from the pandemic and this summer's wildfire crisis while also addressing the twin ecological crises of biodiversity loss and climate change. Y2Y recommends that Budget 2022 includes support for green infrastructure and support for Indigenous-led initiatives to conserve wildlife and habitat. We are encouraged by the government's commitment to implementing the recommendations of the Old Growth Strategic Review, and Budget 2022 should include funding in line with these recommendations. Recommendation number 1 of this report urges the province to establish support programs for Indigenous groups to build upon their land and forest management expertise and to establish government-to-government planning relationships. Y2Y is engaged with First Nations partners to build support for Indigenous-led conservation proposals, such as those by the Okanagan Indian Band, Casca Dene Council, and Seke Dene Nation, among many others. We recommend that the budget include direct supports to establish government-to-government land management relationships and to help build ethical space for Indigenous-led solutions to conservation issues, including Indigenous protected area proposals in line with Canada's commitment to protect 25% of land by 2025. Y2Y recommends that the government provide support to Indigenous communities to pursue conservation-based businesses and economies, including cultural and ecotourism businesses and clean energy, as requested by the Union of BC Indian Chiefs. I would also like to highlight the Old Growth Strategic Review recommendations number 13 and number 14, which request support for socioeconomic transition planning for communities to address destabilizing events and provide certainty and stability by proactively planning ahead. As part of the government's commitments, Budget 2022 should include support for forest sector workers and communities as they adapt to changes resulting from the wildfires and new forest management systems. It should provide adequate funding to investigate and facilitate emerging local and regional economic opportunities and conservation funding. We know that investment in conservation, ecological restoration, and green infrastructure can stimulate rural economies. One type of green infrastructure that Y2Y would like to highlight is a practical solution to make highways safer for people and wildlife. In BC, there are roughly 10,000 wildlife vehicle collisions each year, which cost the province upward of $25 million annually. We would like to see the province dedicate funding to the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure that is earmarked to reducing wildlife vehicle collisions. There's a very exciting example where Y2Y is working with the province, First Nations, local communities, industry, and researchers on a collaborative project along BC Highway number 3, where the cost of wildlife vehicle collisions may be as high as $3 million per year. Y2Y would like to thank the province for leading a 5-year integrated project implementing infrastructure solutions in the highest priority area here, the Alexander Michel linkage corridor just west of the Alberta border around Sparwood. The project consists of 8 underpasses and 1 major wildlife overpass, which would be the largest in BC. This is year 2 of the project. The first installations are in place. Fencing mitigation is starting. The overpass is slated to begin construction when funding is in place. Y2Y recommends that BC take the opportunity to create jobs, making our highways safer, and include funding of $16 million for the completion of this shovel-ready project in the Rockies. In closing, much has been said about what the COVID-19 crisis has revealed about our society's relationship to the natural world. Along with the pandemic, the interlinked and the wildfires, the interlinked catastrophes of biodiversity loss on a global scale and climate change have created uncertainty for businesses and industry, uncertainty for communities, and uncertainty for wildlife. This uncertainty about the health and security of nature and our economies is a major concern for British Columbians. As we look to invest in shovel-ready projects today, we must also seek opportunities to build resilience into the natural infrastructure that protects society and preserves biodiversity for tomorrow. by investing in cleaner and healthier future for people and nature, investing in Indigenous-led solutions and green infrastructure, we know that BC can come out of this crisis with a stronger and more resilient economy, more resilient environment, and more resilient community. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Tim. And now we'll hear from Randall McNair, Wild Site. Whenever you're ready, Randall.
My sincere apologies. I had a technical crash, but I am back. So good morning, Honorable Chair and members of the Finance Committee. Thank you for allowing me to appear before you today. My name is Randall McNair, and I'm speaking to you from Ktunaxa-Amakas, the unceded territory of the Ktunaxa Nation, from the town that you may know as Fern. I'm before you in my position as Conservation Coordinator for the Elk Valley for Wild Site, a conservation organization here in the Kootenays. And I'm here today to advocate for adequate funding for wildlife conservation. Indeed, I'm here to submit that BC should reposition ourselves as a leader in wildlife conservation. While BC is known for our natural beauty and biodiversity, the reality is that we face something much different. A lack of investment in fish, wildlife, and habitat management, combined with impacts of resource extraction, has severely reduced a number of species and is jeopardizing the future of BC's natural legacy. As you may be aware, a province-wide coalition is calling for the government to reestablish the province as a world leader in fish, wildlife, and habitat management. The Fish, Wildlife, and Habitat Coalition represents a diverse array of interests who share common concerns about the decline of fish, wildlife, and their environment. Environmental and conservation organizations, hunting and angling guides, wildlife viewing, ecotourism, naturalists, hunters, anglers, and trappers have come together to seek a commitment from the province to invest in healthy landscapes, waters, and fish and wildlife stewardship in partnership with First Nations and communities. British Columbia has a greater biodiversity than all of our neighbors, yet we have one of the most poorly funded fish, wildlife, and habitat agencies in North America. BC spends less per species, less per square kilometer, and less per person than Washington, Idaho, Montana, or Alberta. When funding is available, on-the-ground stewardship is nearly impossible due to legislation which targets resource extraction. Cumulatively, these declines result in social conflict, which is the antithesis to reconciliation. Fish, wildlife, and habitat is valued by First Nations and non-First Nations of BC alike for existence, for use, for enjoyment. Further, the opportunity for future generations to see, use, and know fish and wildlife habitat must be preserved. Fish and wildlife and their habitat provides jobs, revenue, viewing opportunities, and sustenance. Our way of life in British Columbia relies on healthy, abundant fish, wildlife, and their habitat. Given the current trajectory, this way of life will follow the mountain caribou and steelhead into extinction, costing British Columbia jobs, revenue, and perhaps our very identity. BC needs to prioritize fish, wildlife, and habitat and have a plan for provincial and regional levels supported by long-term committed funding, or declines will continue to occur until these populations blink out one by one. While the $10 million dedicated to Together for Wildlife has sent a signal that the province is starting to pay attention to the biodiversity crisis facing our province, BC must have dedicated annual allocation beyond Flinrod based staffing and operations, as well as a mechanism to increase funding and revenue for fish, wildlife, and their habitat. Something that's often overlooked in this discussion is the societal importance of adequate funding for wildlife. As someone who spent half my life living in rural communities in British Columbia and half in the two largest urban centers, I'm acutely aware of the rural-urban divide that exists in our province. An oft-repeated example of this divide by my friends and neighbors is the lack of funding for wildlife and habitat conservation. My friends and neighbors truly feel that they are voices in the wilderness. I submit to you that increasing funding for wildlife and habitat will help bridge this divide and help bring British Columbians closer together. We can all be proud that BC has taken steps to become a leader when it comes to things like childcare and other social issues. As a province, we can become a leader when it comes to wildlife and habitat conservation. And seeing that I do have a couple more minutes, I'd like to just make reference to the work that's been done by the Minister of Transportation with respect to the connectivity issue raised by my colleague from Y2Y. I live in the Elk Valley, where this investment is being made to make it safer for wildlife and transportation drivers. And some really good work has been done by the Ministry of Transportation, and I would applaud that and hope that it continues and expands. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Randall. So that concludes the presentations on wildlife, and I'd now ask for the committee to ask their questions. Mike.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the two presenters enlightening what's going on out there. I have a question for Tim. You made mention of support for the green infrastructure. Can you elaborate on what it is specifically when you're talking about a green infrastructure?
Well, I think the example that I gave at the end of the presentation and what Randall just mentioned as well, the highways infrastructure for connectivity projects. These are ways of building our actual transportation infrastructure in a way that doesn't prohibit connectivity of wildlife across large landscapes and actually facilitates that. As I mentioned, highway collisions cost taxpayers $25 million roughly in British Columbia each year with 10,000 collisions. And we know that projects like the Alexander Michel Linkage Project are able to reduce those collisions by roughly 80%. In that case, with $3 million happening on that, of collisions happening on that specific linkage, that could pay for itself in 10 years or so. Additional green infrastructure could be looking at how we build restoration economies. We know that restoration work, ecological restoration, where trees are planted, seismic lines are restored, things like that, can generate a lot of jobs per dollar of investment. I believe it's for every $1 million, it's 33 jobs that are created, which is actually a pretty good return of jobs to investment comparative to resource extractive industries. So I would encourage one thing I can do for the member is provide a report that Y2Y has done with partners in the Revelstoke area, which looks at emerging economies and how to build an economy of the future that includes green infrastructure projects. Now, I will certainly include that in our written submission.
Great, thank you.
Pam.
And this is for Tim as well, and just it's regarding submissions. So you had a lot of information for us, so I'm just wanting to make sure that that was included in your written submission, that when you do, because it was well done, so thank you for that. Not to say
thank you, yes.
That Rand was also well done, but I just wanted to make sure that we had a written submission from you.
Absolutely. I know I did touch on quite a few issues because we do have a large geography and BC is a huge place. I will certainly be providing detailed written submissions by the September 30th deadline.
Okay.
Ben.
Thanks very much. And it was an interesting information, Tim, about the highway collisions and the costs. And anyways, I can see that that's a project that could move ahead along highway corridors. But I wanted to ask Randall about your comment about the investment by other neighboring states. You didn't mention Alberta, but you mentioned Idaho, Montana, and Washington, and the per capita investment. Can you just kind of give us the numbers as to what our neighboring states are and what they're doing with the funds? Like how is it invested? How is it set up that you're comparing that we're not doing enough?
Yeah, and I got that from the BC Wildlife Federation actually, and I tried to get some immediate clarity. If I didn't mention Alberta, I meant to, because Alberta is another jurisdiction that we're falling behind. Like Tim, I can get that information to you from the BC Wildlife Federation. I do recall some numbers, but they're 3 or 4 years old. But apparently, the trend has continued.
Yeah, I think that, I do think it is important. I'm trying to remember there's a park down in your neck of the woods that crosses over into the Montana, et cetera. And I remember having a heated discussion, and we had actually ended up having to work on the agreement jointly between Montana and I think Idaho. But anyways, I think it's important that we do see this on a long-term basis about, access to the environment and the health of it and all those type of things. So it's important information.
Thank you, Emily. Student Stewart.
Are there additional questions from the committee? Well, with that, we'll conclude this panel. And I guess in conclusion, what I'd like to say is, we are living through a time of shifting public expectations that we need to keep up with and get ahead of. And the work that you do and the things that you've brought to our attention today help us greatly in responding appropriately and accordingly. And I am struck, Randall, by your comment about voices in the wilderness. And you have, I think, previously we thought that meant one thing. And I think you have reinforced that it now means something entirely different and more important. So thanks to both of you for what you've brought to us today. And with that, we'll say goodbye. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for your time today.
So we'll now recess till 11. And we're now moving into a panel on invasive species. Our first presenter is Robin Hooper, Columbia Shuswap Invasive Species Society, followed by Randy Harris, East Kootenay Invasive Species Council. Each have 5 minutes to present, and then we'll have questions from the committee. So, Robin, whenever you're ready.
Good morning, and thank you, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present to the Standing Committee. My name is Robin Hooper, and I'm the Executive Director of the Columbia Shuswap Invasive Species Society. Can you just hear me okay? I just wanted to double check. Yeah, okay. As a witness to the BC budget review, I have some key messages to present on behalf of my board and staff. I also wanted to note that our organization is an affiliate of the Invasive Species Council of BC. I don't believe they're able to make today, but we share key messages with them as well as with the regional invasive species organizations of BC. So I'd like to speak to the aspect of closing key pathways to prevent the introduction of new invasive species into BC. Here in the Columbia Shuswap, we had the recent discovery of a freshwater clam, Curbicula fluminea, in the Shuswap Lake last year. And this poses a threat to our local ecosystems and freshwater infrastructure. It can reach high densities and cause loss of biodiversity due to competition for food and space with native species. It can alter water chemistry and drinking water and cause biofouling of pipes and water treatment systems. We need provincial regulations to prevent these and other aquatic invasive species. You've heard a lot about zebra and quagga mussels in the past, but there are many others, including invasive fish, whirling disease, spiny water flea, and many others that we want to prevent from entering the province. Regulatory tools are needed to protect our ecosystems, our tourism recreation values, as well as drinking water quality and hydropower resources. In the past few years, we have had success in increasing water monitoring for invasive mussels in the Columbia Shuswap. We've done so in partnership with the province and the Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation. These programs support early detection and rapid response that are vital in this fight against invasive species. Our society is uniquely posed to support these efforts. We have over 26 funding partners and over 200 partnering organizations in the Columbia Shuswap region. We leverage provincial funding over 7-fold with other funding sources and therefore greatly increase return on investment as a nonprofit charity. We also have unique regional and community ties to get work done on the ground. We partner with Indigenous communities, local governments, industry partners, land managers, community groups, and other stakeholders. So more is needed. And the key messages I have is that we need to update and enforce regulations to ensure that invasive species are not introduced and spread into and across the province. The current regulation has outdated lists of invasive species that enable many to slip between regulations. As well, mitigating climate change impacts requires strong, efficient action against invasive species to protect our resilient ecosystems that are vital in helping reduce the intensity of wildfires and floods, and in protecting species diversity. And kind of to summarize here, the main piece is that we need stable long-term funding, and we need a new approach to funding to ensure that BC is protected from invasive species threats. I think Randy is going to speak more to the terrestrial invasive species impacts. I wanted to cover some of those aquatic invasive species. And yeah, we greatly appreciate the time and being able to present. I've got a little extra time, so hopefully there's some questions I know at the end as well. So thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Robin. So now we'll turn to Randy.
Okay, well, thank you for this opportunity to present to the Standing Committee. My name is Randy Harris. I'm replacing the original speaker, Hillary Baker. I'm the chair of the board of directors from the East Kootenay Invasive Species Council. Most of my messaging from our board and staff are very similar to what you would have heard from the Invasive Species Council of BC and the Columbia Shuswap Invasive Species Society. We share similar concerns, and we've agreed prior to this meeting on our messages. ECIS does manage for a full suite of invasive species, but our focus, which is driven by our local community priorities, is treating terrestrial invasive plants, specifically those that endanger our rare, heavily impacted grassland areas. Grasslands are 1% of the land area of British Columbia, but they contain 30% of the species at risk in BC. The grasslands are also critical to the cattle ranching industry that contribute $600 million a year to the BC economy and employ 8,700 people. We have about 80 active ranches in our zone. The grasslands and open forests also provide the critical winter habitat for elk, deer, and bighorn sheep for all of BC. Unfortunately, this rich, diverse habitat is valley bottom and is heavily fragmented by urbanization, highways, power lines, cities, and off-track vehicle use, all of which bring invasive plants into the habitat. It often fails to regional invasive species organizations such as us and our allies to assist government land managers in reducing the impact of invasive plants and controlling their spread. We work mostly on Crown land, but we also work in BC Parks, Nature Trust of BC, and Nature Conservancy of Canada properties throughout our zone, trying to create a cross-boundary response to these invasive species throughout the regional district of East Kootenay. As an example of this collaboration, in 2020, ECA started a 5-year inventory management and invasive plant management program in the Northern Elk Valley, about 20,000 hectares. We worked with 15 area organizations and local governments to manage invasive plants on a cross-jurisdictional landscape level. With three separate non-government funding sources, this alliance tripled the amount of money received from the provincial government to manage this critical area, and we spent it in a focused, integrated manner. We're also inserting invasive plant management into local efforts at climate mitigation. ECISC is currently working 2 of the 4 nation reserves in our district to provide them with invasive plant inventories and management plans to be integrated with their dry forest restoration projects. These projects involving thinning dense, ingrown, fire-suppressed forests and the reintroduction of cultural burning practices. These on-reserve management practices involve targeted grazing of weeds with goats and the suppression of these pockets of weakened plants with grass seed. First Nations prefer not to use herbicides to preserve medicinal plants. This combination of activities is of great interest to another client, the Rocky Mountain Trench Ecosystem Restoration Program, which would like to introduce the grass seeding trials with weed pulls or a judicious use of herbicide to Crown land. If the Ecosystem Restoration Program thins a forest for fuel management or habitat, it would not be an ecological gain if a thinning and prescribed burning creates a weed field from a dense forest. A weed-reduced site with good grass cover, even pockets of introduced grass, can create a resilient, self-regulating grassland, one that can survive the extreme high-impact wildfires we are experiencing. We want to reduce and control the spread of weeds so you don't have the resources for full eradication. We will also need this herbicide and grass seed treatments to better manage soil stabilization, invasive plant suppression, and wildfires, post-wildfire. We cannot afford an ecosystem of black stumps and knapweed. So in order to carry on with our integrated landscape management approaches to invasive plant management and climate change mitigation, we'll need the stable long-term funding that Robin spoke of. As well, we're all in agreement that we need a new approach in funding to ensure BC is protected from invasive plant threats. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Randy. So it does look like there's just the 2 presenters. So we'll now open it up to questions from the committee to either or both of you. Greg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, Robin. Great presentation. And Randy, thank you very much for making your presentation to our committee. Have you guys identified what the magnitude of the budgetary lift that you're looking for is? Is there an actual dollar figure that is actually going to be part of your written submission?
Absolutely. I think we were both expecting Gail Wallen to precede us with the number figures. So the number was around 15 million annually.
And I think that's up from 5 million currently.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so a $10 million lift?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Nice to see you.
Ben.
Very much, Robin. I just wanted to ask you about the invasive clam that you mentioned that had got into your area. I guess the question with the quagga and zebra mussels, and we put all those road checks in and stuff like that, and what's the answer? I mean, you just rattled off a list of things that I don't even know, and I'm just thinking, is this a losing battle, or are we actually, what do we have to do? Because I mean, in the Okanagan, I mean, I bet you 50% of the boats that are on the lake are from somewhere else.
Yeah, great question. And it's funny when we're looking for something that we don't want to find. So every year that passes that we don't have invasive mussels, to me, is a success. And having invasive clams be discovered in Shuswap Lake was a bit of a wake-up call, I think, for the region, that things are still being transported in waterways that we don't know about. I think the inspection station and decontaminations that happen around the borders is a huge success story for the province. And that program needs to continue, and the funding needs to continue to those programs. That's the first step in terms of watercraft coming into the province, is getting them inspected and decontaminated. However, within the province, there's still boat traffic being moved around. And so that's where we promote clean, drain, dry. So getting folks to clean their boats of any material, drain them fully, and make sure they're dry between water bodies. So we don't know how long the clams have been in the lake. If they were elsewhere in BC and moved around, they were also recently found in the Penderay, in the Kootenays, and they are found in the Lower Mainland. So they were already in British Columbia, but they were a new infestation to our region, to the Shuswap watershed. So in terms of what can be done, I think prevention at the borders for anything new coming into BC, but also the promotion of that clean, drain, dry program that I speak of, and funding to our regional organizations that can help with that prevention. That little bit of funding that goes into outreach and prevention, it saves millions of dollars long run for the cost that it would have when we have these invasive species. That answer your question? Do you have a follow-up?
Well, it begs the question, where do these things kind of, are they in the boat, on the boat, or are they on the trailer, or all three?
All of the above, yeah. So
okay.
Zebra and quagga mussels are particularly nasty because they can cling to the boats and to the trailers.
Yeah.
Some of the other species, and including invasive mussels, the larvae form can be found in the water. And so that's where it's a threefold process of making sure any materials that's on the boat is cleaned off, and then any water that can hold things. So whirling disease is another disease that is microscopic and found in the water. Yeah. But every year that we don't have them, I think it's a blessing. So.
Yeah. Time for one more. Randall, a question to you. Yeah. And you're talking about invasive species on the, on the land. And I've heard this, especially in the South Okanagan with some of the trails. Anyways, I think that what you're talking about, some of those, like the traditional integrated methods and goats, etc. I mean, just using some of these things that are, not conventional or whatever. I think that that's great. I don't know what we do. I mean, I think it'd be great if the place looked a little bit like the Alps or something like that, where we had, or New Zealand, where you see, sheep running around. Now, I don't know if they cause other problems, but anyways, if they are part of the solution, I think it's kind of interesting. So, but I know that there is some, and I can't remember the species that's in the Okanagan that they talk about that's quite invasive. So anyways, you don't even think about it when you're not really out there looking for this type of stuff.
Oh yeah, like we actually have about 5 species that we're trying to target with the goat.
Yeah.
Fortunately, they all have yellow flowers, so you know where they are. But we've actually, 3 of our local reserves have actually been using goats, targeting these 4 deadly species. And what we do find is that the goats can reduce the plant and get it down to, it's a very small plant.
Yeah.
And the literature says use herbicide, but the First Nations, because they use their reserves for medicinal plants, they would like something non-chemical. So putting grass seed on top of it actually just means you're suppressing that plant. Quite often you put the native seeds in with your agronomic species. Mm-hmm. The agronomics can suppress the plant, and then it acts as a nurse crop so the native plants can reestablish on site. It's just one of those things. We don't think we can fully eradicate all the invasive plants that we see out there. What we want to do is reduce their number, because we're going to have a wildfire going through the valley bottom at some point. We want an ecosystem that has a very low loading of invasive plants so they don't explode after a wildfire, and just so the grass system itself is self-regulating so that it will with new species introduced in pockets, actually reduce the amount of weeds that are on site. It'll probably look better, which is not quite alpine, and we don't think we're going to be keeping goats everywhere just because they have they can spread diseases into bighorn sheep, which is a concern in the Okanagan. So, but if you use some herbicide or weed pulling, we've even heard if you mow them down with a cutter, anything that can actually weaken the plant and then put grass seed on top of it, that might be a more effective treatment, just because it does take us a long time to fully eradicate through herbicide.
Thank you.
Harwinder.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Robin and Randall, for your presentations. And I know this invasive species issues a big one in the Okanagan and Kootenays. Thank you for highlighting it for the rest of the committee members. Robin, you highlighted the request to update the forest regulations, as there are some, things we need to look at. What are some major concerns you might want to highlight that needs to be looked at it immediately to address this? Thank you.
Robin, mute.
Thank you. I'm just going to pull up. We've spoken to this to the committee in the past, and there's an outdated Noxious Weed Act primarily, and so there's a call for an invasive species regulation that might bring in other invasive species. But you're right, there are a number of regulations, forestry, the sort of the fisheries side of things. There's a number of acts and regulations that include invasive species. So I think the call for an integrated invasive species act would bring things together. Let me just quickly see if I can pull up the specific act. And Randy, if you want to jump in here too.
I'll just throw there. Part of it is to update the Weed Act, which is currently in the regulation that would actually reinforce through the Forest and Range Practices Act and the Fisheries Act. What has been the discussion in the past, which we haven't seen in the past few years, is to create an Invasive Species Act that would actually integrate all those things beyond just terrestrial plants. It's more than just terrestrial plants we're not worried about. The impact of the aquatic plants that Robin spoke of could actually have even more higher impacts to the to the economy and just to the health of the people, just because you're actually now affecting the water supply rather than just rangelands and roadside areas. And a lot of that is none of these acts so far talk to shutting down these pathways of the introduction of weeds into this area. We do have some legislation for the invasive mussels, zebra and quagga mussels, but we'd also like to see things like don't grow this plant, because if it escapes from your field, if it escapes from your garden, it'll actually have a deleterious effect on the rest of the gardens around you, or just the landscape around you. Yes, or just maybe people, just some direction, don't keep releasing your goldfish into Lake Windermere, because goldfish are actually carp and they can get this big once you take them out of that tiny little bowl. So it's other species that actually we'd like to regulate the reintroduction of species all throughout the province.
That's right. Yeah, so these are all included in the invasive species strategy of BC. And so as Randy said, it's an updated BC Weed Control Act regulation and a new Invasive Species Act. And some other key pieces would be prohibiting the sale of invasive species. What's a strange part of this act is that people are prohibited from growing some species on their property, but they're not prohibited for sale. Right. So they can still be buying some of these plants at garden centers and then get in trouble for having it on their property. This has been in the report on the budget in 2017, 2018, 2019, 2016, 2013, 2014. So number of years now.
We've missed a few.
And and last year as well in 2020.
Thank you so much to both of you. And I think it was reassuring for me to know my daughter, who's a science student at UBCO, and she's only 19, and she was talking to her 14-year-old sister a couple weeks ago about aquatic invasive species. And I paused because this issue comes up in this role, over and over, and it was reassuring for me to know how much youth knew. And I even had her to explain it to me, because the way she was explaining was very simpler version. And thank you for the work you're doing. And obviously, the younger generations are also keen and interested to deal with this issue, which is, I think, taken over in many regions. So thank you once again.
Thank you so much. Great story.
Thank you.
Mike.
Randy, you touched on it with regards to the invasive species that's in the forestry and how it affects fuel load, and then you talked about taking it down and then putting some grass on it. So is the grass that we're talking about something that's engineered? Because just as a layperson, it just seems like we're trading off one fuel load for another fuel load when you present grass that dries out.
Oh yeah, and actually, it's actually working with the people who deal with fuel loading and wildfires. Like all carbon-based organisms will actually burst into flames if you heat them up enough. And grass it burns at a much lower temperature, say about 500 degrees Fahrenheit versus a tree, which is about 1200. It's a cooler fire, and grass will actually flash over a site in about 45 seconds, whereas the trees burn over about a 5-minute period. It's a hotter, more duration period if you have the fires. The fires can be flashy, but what our wildfire specialists say, if you keep a grass fire down on the ground, they can knock it down with hand tools and something just as wide as a footpath. Whereas if you have if the fire gets into the trees, those sparks, it produces much more heat, and it also throws the sparks much farther. And it's really hard to actually combat that. So the direction from them is please open up the forest, get the fires onto the ground where they can actually combat them easily. And it's a low impact burn that actually will not damage the site that much. And we can actually control it with, just with less effort.
Okay, thank you.
And as a benefit too, by the way, one of the ways of actually reducing the fire hazard around a community is that you can get cows and deer to eat the grass. So if you use nature's lawnmowers, you can actually reduce your fire hazard with grazing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing other questions. So we'll conclude this presentation, this panel, by thanking you for once again presenting to this committee and bringing it to our attention. You may have presented before, but I don't think there's anyone on this committee this year who's been on the committee before. And I think that, as I was listening to your presentations and your answers to the questions, I think wherever we live in BC, we have experience of the effect of invasive species. And I think we know intuitively that it's a problem. And perhaps, too many of us have just kind of accepted it as reality. You have reinforced why it's a problem, why we need to be proactive, and you've shared some innovative ideas with us. So we will, amongst ourselves, pursue this in more detail when we deliberate. I think the things that have been happening in the past year bring it more into focus in terms of going forward, and that we need to do something. So thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you for giving us the opportunity.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay,
Thank you. Have a great day.
And we'll recess for 10 minutes. And we're having now two individual presentations. The first one is Glenn Auger, Wetlands Workforce. So Glenn, I understand you're here, and you have 5 minutes to make your presentation, and then we have about 5 minutes to ask you questions. So when you're ready, Glenn, you can begin. Are you ready, Glenn?
Hello, yes. Can you hear me all right?
Absolutely.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank the Standing Committee, the Finance Committee, on this opportunity to present. So my name's Glenn Auger. I'm a member of Tall Cree First Nations. We're signatory to Treaty 8. And I've been hired on with the Wetlands Workforce Group as the First Nations liaison person. And so our wetlands workforce, what we've been doing is working to protect, restore, and promote BC's wetlands and watersheds. The Wetlands Workforce Project, it came out of the funding that was allotted through the Healthy Watersheds Initiative, part of the $10 billion collaboration with conservation organizations and First Nations that deployed work pods across British Columbia throughout 2021. So some of these works were improve riparian area habitat, monitor the effectiveness of wetland restoration sites, advance collaborative restoration projects with First Nations and communities, provide employment opportunities targeting women, young adults, and First Nations individuals. Support province-wide monitoring initiatives that will improve wetland management. What we did is we had this little thing, we called it a water droplet. And what we did is we provided this picture, and it was a translation of water from the various languages throughout the province. And it was kind of a smaller one, but it just showed kind of the impact of the many different communities that we have in British Columbia. And so just seeing that a small piece of it was
Oh dear, Glenn, I think you've cut out. We're not hearing you.
You're not hearing me? Oh.
You're cutting in and out.
Yeah, okay. It's just our internet, so where we're at here. So can you hear me again?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so the Wetlands Workforce and Reconciliation, what we did is we'd had hosted 5 regional collaborative sessions this year. We've had over 50 First Nations communities in BC actively engaged with us. We've communicated with 120 Indigenous communities throughout the province regarding the project and the available opportunities. Through this program, we've hired 23 students hired from the Northern Lights College program, a partnership with Northern Lights in providing a practicum training. Individuals from 35 First Nations communities have participated in our online training sessions. And then we also provided upfront 3 custom decolonization and awareness training sessions created for the work crews. So we did this training session before the crews actually went out to the field to start working out there to just identify and help them know what they could possibly be seeing with the many different communities throughout the province, and just being able to understand how to engage and work with those communities. And then we had 10 community members received in-person training in the Rapid Wetlands Health Assessment Protocol, which is it's called WESP, and it's a Wetlands Eco-Services Protocol data entry program that we're developing within the province of British Columbia. And so they're going out regionally and tabulating data in regards to WESP. So what it is there's 60 questions that are answered in regards to this WESP protocol. And what it is it's creating a data source for future work activities around wetlands. And so we can monitor and see how wetlands restoration or any future wetlands work can be identified and what that means for both communities and provinces within the region. And then, so the last part I'd like to talk about is the way forward. We'd like to support First Nations-led stewardship projects, bridge funding to keep this good work going on for the Watershed Security Fund is in place, and then fund healthy watershed initiatives that protect and enhance species watersheds. And the last point, provide work and learning opportunities to support future stewards of our land. Thank you very much to the committee.
Thank you, Glenn. I'll now take some questions from the committee. Pam.
Thank you, Glenn. And from what I heard, and I know there were pockets that we didn't hear, fascinating program, really, really good work. And I just want to make sure that your written submission is detailed so that we can pick up the pieces that we may not have heard. Okie doke.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mike.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for your presentation, Glenn. When you talk about improving riparian habitat, I know that is very labor intensive to be able to do that. What I'm curious about is what is the amount of kilometers of riparian habitat that you've been able to get back into its natural state or into a better state, and what would be the goal in the future with regards to riparian habitat?
The easiest thing is I won't in kilometers. We've worked on 60 various sites throughout the province, and so there are watersheds that have been identified through either projects that are already in place and that we're doing follow-up works and reclamation on those sites. So some of that has been follow-up into that type of work. And then some of it is this WESP training that we're talking about is another component. So there's been the two. There's been the actual work on the wetland sites and the actual data entry identification on the wetland sites. So that alone has been, to my understanding, I think we're somewhere close to, what it was is we wanted to identify 80 sites, and we have 4 regions within British Columbia, we call them eco-provinces, that we've worked in. And we are hoping to do at least 80 sites within each of those eco-provinces. So there's very many sites that, and I don't have all of that information yet because all of the sites have not been completed yet. There's still ongoing work. So hopefully that can answer your question.
Thank you. That is very ambitious, to say the least. And because of the theme today seems to be invasive species, during the improvement of the riparian habitat, are you removing those invasive species?
Yes, we are. That part of that. So some of it could be works that are maintaining safe. There's like some places have dams. So there's locks and stuff, so there's maintenance of that activity. There's site reclamation on trails and trail systems for the public to use. There's removal of invasive species. And so there's many different ways, like some of them have to be pulled, some can be cut. So we've done the various means of utilizing the best way we can manage to do that with each of our wetlands.
Great, thank you.
Ben.
Hi, Glenn. It's Ben Stewart here from Kelowna West. I just wanted to ask you about a couple of things. So it sounds to me like that this, the wetlands workforce is a relatively new project, and I'm wondering what the funding is that you have currently. What do you need, kind of going ahead to, I guess that's what we're here for, is to figure out what type of budgetary needs are needed for this type of work. And, or is there a commitment you already have and you're not looking
Well,
for...
actually what it was is, you're correct on yes, it's new, and it was because of the way this funding was laid out that it is a new process. So basically we had the year starting in early February that we started hiring individuals to build the teams and the work pods that are working out there. And so we're basically working until the 15th of December, and that's when our contracts will end. And so what we're looking for is bridge funding where we can provide this follow-up to the works that have been done this year. And we've had a very strong success of collaboration and the ability to work cohesively with many different Indigenous communities and individuals from those communities and working on our work pods throughout the province. So ideally what we'd like to be able to continue this initiative moving forward on for many years to come. And then, so that's what we're looking for.
Okay, and the other question that I have is, what are the 4 eco-provinces? What's the geographic location of those?
Okay, so the first one is the Georgia Depression, which is the lower mainland and part of Vancouver Island. And then there's the northern region ones, which is the Taiga Plains and the Boreal. So there's 2 together, and so that they're a large component of the western part of the province. And then there's the Kootenay region. Kootenay boundary region is the other one. And that's another thing that we'd like to be able to expand on in the future, is that with the bridge funding is what we're hoping that it'll provide opportunity for expansion of being able to work in the central regions of the province and some more in the northwest part of the province that we weren't able to get to this year. And hopefully that bridge funding will provide some of that for the future.
That's fantastic. Thanks.
Well, I'm not seeing more questions, and I think that's because you've been very, very clear about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and the value on so many fronts that you've identified. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you for meeting with the committee, and we will be talking about this in much more detail when we deliberate and make our recommendations on the budget. Thank you for your leadership on this.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hello. Okay, our next presenter is Laura Sachs, Citizens Climate Lobby, Nelson West Kootenay Chapter. So, Laura.
Yes, hello everyone. And I'm focusing on rural communities and greenhouse gas reductions. And so first off, I wanted to say that rural communities are really on the front lines of climate change impacts that we've seen this summer with the horrific wildfires burning. And these affect not only properties, but community cohesion, local economies, for example, lack of tourists because of wildfire smoke and evacuation alerts, as well as the very real impacts of physical and mental health. So being closer to the land, rural residents understand the existential threat that the climate crisis represents, especially without help for measures to build resilience and to be part of the global effort to rapidly reach net zero emissions and stabilize the climate. So last March, the BC government set ambitious greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, sectoral targets of around 60% reduction by 2030 for buildings and communities. And while we applaud the ambition, rural and small communities are strapped for resources, both financial and staff, to work on these goals. So I'm here today to ask for more resources to go to programs that would help rural communities to meet greenhouse gas targets. Our written submission will include a lot more detail, and I'm going to just provide a few examples here today. The primary sources of greenhouse gases in rural communities is transportation and buildings. So first for transportation is a request to support active transportation. So the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure's mandate letter from November 2020 asks to, quote, work with communities to expand their networks of active transportation to meet our clean BC goals, to doubling trips taken by walking, biking, and other kinds of active networks by the year 2030. So we ask the province to support safe, active transportation on provincial highways through regulations and funding for safe, separated paths or lanes and signage. There's a great opportunity to reduce car use through active transportation networks out of harm's way of traffic. And besides the greenhouse gas reductions and safety, active transportation trail systems improve health by getting people out of their cars, providing family-friendly opportunities for recreation and economic development by bringing in tourists. We also, the second request is around transportation and regarding rural regional transit. Rural residents rely heavily on personal car use to get around because of the lack of regional transit systems, especially in the face of the demise of Greyhound. Some regional systems have sprung up, but better service and interconnection is needed. This is especially a concern for residents trying to get to healthcare appointments. So we'd like to see the province. Can you not hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, I got a note that you couldn't. Oh, okay. Well, I'm gonna have to rush through this now. Okay, so basically I was saying that we would like the province to direct resources for a study to explore options such as on-demand transit systems or a provincially funded rural bus system, including consultation with First Nations, persons with disabilities, and groups representing other sectors like seniors, students, and women. Switching to buildings quickly, we ask that the government support the Help Cities Lead initiative whose requests would be an enormous aid to rural municipalities trying to reduce greenhouse gases from buildings. One of the requests is allowing communities to easily implement a program called PACE, which stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy Financing. And essentially, PACE allows loans for energy retrofits and renewable energy systems to stay with the property via property taxes rather than being financed by the property owner. So we ask that the government fund the costs of getting regulations in place to allow PACE to be implemented in communities across the province. And we're grateful that the BC government recently spent $2 million on a PACE roadmap study. And so that should help see what's involved. The last thing I wanted to mention briefly is that Health Cities Lead also requests that communities be given the authority to mandate against fossil fuels in new construction and phase them out of old buildings. And so we ask that the province dedicate funds to develop appropriate regulations that would allow this freedom to encourage fuel switching. So there's much needing to be done. I'm highlighting a few, and our written submission will include much more, including resilience and adaptation to climate impacts that we're currently experiencing. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. And we'll now open it up to questions from the committee.
Thanks very much, Laura. And I know that this issue about active transportation will go on a long time because there's so many kilometers of highway. That's my question to you. Where do you start in terms of, like, take a community like where you live, etc. Where would you prioritize and I guess getting that information through to transportation, because we can't do it all at one time. And if there is a focus, where would it be? You know, and I mean, we've heard from some of the groups that are working on trails, you know, throughout different communities and et cetera. But tell me, how would you prioritize?
Yes, that's an excellent question. And one thing that we're doing here in the West Kootenay, I actually live rurally between Castlegar and Nelson, and I for many years, counting the cars going by that are commuters that are going back and forth. I don't even like to get out on the highway because I'm right here on the highway. An example that a working group has come together in our area to look at this and to try to get stats on routes that are very busy, but also would reduce the commuter traffic and things like that. So obviously we can't do this everywhere, I agree. And I know that in some rural areas, the distances are too large, but I think by looking at where the biggest traffic areas, I guess where the benefit would be the best is what I'm trying to get at. So, and I would think that you would have the resources probably to be able to do a study like that way more than I would just, but I think that from my experience, finding communities on the ground that are interested in working on that. So for example, in this area where we already have a representative from Ministry of Transportation and one from the regional district and one from Parks and Trails from rural, Flynn Row with rural development in there. I forget the name of that acronym now. So anyhow, that was my thoughts.
Just to follow on with that, because of the nature of your communities, do you think the money would be, like, do you think that having to go to transportation and get them to kind of fund this versus something like maybe communities having access to funds to being able to help execute this and prioritize it? Do you think that's I'm just trying to, do you think that would work in your area?
I think it needs to be a combination of having funding come, but as well, like we're looking at creative things like, tourism, for example. I think it's going to have to be partnerships between, getting funding because this is a big benefit for tourism. That cycling is quite popular for people to come in and be able to safely go from one location to another, and so finding the pieces of the puzzle within communities, but having transportation be there as a support and not necessarily an impediment. I was talking to our transportation lead in the area, and there is no, for example, no expectation for doing anything for active transportation in our Highway 3A corridor. And so even though I heard there was a 20-year plan going on, they're basically thinking they're going to add another passing lane. And when you spend millions of dollars blasting cliffs, it might seem like trails are expensive, but compared to some of that work, it's quite a bit more expensive and millions of dollars are being spent. So I would like to see public consultation as well go on for when Ministry of Transportation has a program, a project going in. And another example is a bridge just down the road from where I live, which is right near a popular swimming beach where children are on bikes, has not a single shoulder on it. And so you're coming down the hill on both ways to the river. And they did a regrade of that, and the community didn't know, and so we didn't request shoulders because that was just not even anything that we knew about. The contract already went out, and so that's kind of it's just a small example of what happens all over.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Laura. I see no further questions. I'll just conclude this part of our agenda by thanking you for taking the time to meet with us and share your perspective. I, for one, am struck by what you said about rural communities being on the front line of the climate crisis, and that you have an important perspective to share because you're closer to the land. You have offered today some very concrete, practical proposals, and what I hear you saying is these are proposals that are community-driven, that would meet the needs of your community, and that what you need from us is help to make it possible for you to turn that into reality. So thank you so much for your very clear presentation and practical recommendations. And with that, we'll let you go.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And we will now recess until 1:15.